was also kindly saying already, my name is Josepha. I'm the new marketing lead for Climate Choice, and I'm super happy to welcome you all here for this Choice event number 77, which is actually part of our Climate Choice online webinar series that we are hosting in order to showcase all of you best practices for driving Scope 3 decarbonization. And we at the Climate Choice are actually an AI-first climate intelligence platform helping both procurement teams, but also climate teams to automate supplier engagement processes and also the collection of data for the audit. So it's loading up. I'm waiting for a second.
Yeah, I hope I have the right ones now, actually, to be honest, but should be. Yeah, that's always the funny part if you have a live event, right? But yeah, let's see. Hope you find everything on the slide you wanted.
Very good. And so, yeah, just saying, so this is us, Climate Choice, trying to help companies accelerate their Scope 3 decarbonization journey. And I mean, in that journey or on that journey together with our clients, there is always one of the key challenges that we see, and that is setting, tracking, and achieving Scope 3 targets, especially because there's so many evolving standards and limited supply chain transparency. And to help you navigate these complexities, we are bringing you today this Choice event number 77, where we really want to focus also on the practical strategies to set and meet Scope 3 targets. And if we move to the next slide, I'm super happy to actually announce for this call today also our expert, because you will meet today Dr. Susanne Köhler. She's a climate expert at myclimate, and there she's supporting companies in their decarbonization journey with a very extensive knowledge. You will see this in the webinar about science-based targets, life cycle assessments, and also climate action. And what we want to bring you today is 3 key learnings. So hopefully afterwards you can step out saying that you have, learned something about this. And this is why Scope 3 reduction targets are actually crucial for comprehensive greenhouse gas management, what makes SBTi the current de facto market standard for Scope 3 targets, and also what requirements are needed for companies to meet them, and how you and your companies can turn these targets into meaningful results through collaboration along the supply chain. And how we're going to tackle this topic is along 3 agenda points that we find on the next slide. So you've got the small welcome, which is what Laura and myself are doing right now. And then we will be handing it over to Susanne, who will give her keynote on mastering Scope 3 targets. So showing you the key strategies to really get it right. And then also we have Lara on stage again for the final piece, so to say, wrapping it up by showing you how you can now also kickstart your decarbonization journey around the Scope 3 action group. And if we just move to the next slide, what you see here is the elephant a little bit in the room, right? We're talking here about SBTi, which is one of the most, or if not the most renowned institution actually and global standard setter for science-based climate targets. That is supposed to then also help companies worldwide to really align their emission reduction strategies with the latest climate science. And with that, we all know that SBTi has always been playing a key role in guiding businesses towards meaningful but also measurable climate commitments. However, if you have just followed the news a little bit since the beginning of this year, there has actually been quite some negative also publicity on the development at SBTi because of the carbon credit discussions. And because we were sure that a lot of you might actually be wondering how our webinar fits into this current context. If we move to the next slide, we just wanted to go through a very, very brief overview of the latest happenings to get us all on the same page, but also really take that elephant out of the room. Because in April 2024, so the beginning of this year, what happened is that there was a press release on SBTi's revision of its corporate net zero standard, suggesting now that carbon credits, for example, could be used as an additional tool for tackling Scope 3 emissions. And this was done because there was the recognition also that particularly Scope 3 emissions were oftentimes not only difficult to track, but also to reduce. And while you can think of this whatever you like, in total, this definitely marked a very big shift, from the earlier guidance, which always emphasized on the role of direct emission reductions over offsetting. And so there was an immediate backlash, from both climate scientists, NGOs, but also internal staff, which actually then also triggered the resignation of the SBTi CEO and a call from its technical council to restore trust with the organization in the broader climate community by a public consultation of the report. And so there's still ongoing review, of that revision of the corporate net zero standard. And only by end of the year, there is a new report expected. So if we move to the next slide, I think, there is still a lot of open questions. And all of these developments, what they really highlight is how complex this whole field of setting Scope 3 targets actually is, because there is shifting standards, there is different interpretations, and there is a lot of still blurry atmosphere, so to say. But what we want to emphasize is that we are here today actually to hopefully help all of you gain clarity on robust strategies when you are setting and tackling your Scope 3 emissions. So really trying to help you navigate these shifting environments. And with that, if we move to the next slide, it's also your room to ask questions. So please always use the Zoom chat function to do so. And to get you a little bit warmed up with the keyboard, what I would like to do is to hand it over to my dear colleague Lara to involve you in some fun questions.
Great. Yeah. First of all, thanks for the intro and to this topic. And also thanks, Susanne, for being here today. So you're already on stage. I hope you're fine and looking forward to the webinar. So great to have you. And so we heard already a lot why we think this whole topic is so important to look into Scope 3 and to do things right, so to say, or at least to understand what a robust climate strategy could look like in Scope 3. But before we go into that, we would love to hear from you who you are, why you are here today, so to say. So you should have now a small poll popping up on your screen where you can just tap in. So we have the question, from which role are you joining today? Because we always see that the topic of climate and sustainability is tackled, which is very good. It's not just from one person, maybe the sustainability person, but from many different departments. So you can choose from, maybe you join from the procurement team, from the sustainability team, from supply chain management in general, sustainable procurement, very specific, or you are leading Scope 3 actions, very specific, or others. So that could be everything from strategy, HR, marketing, finance. There are so many different areas in the company and people who are concerned right now about the topic. So I gave you quite a lot of time. I see that many people already answered. It's not so much choice that you have here, so maybe that's a little bit tricky, but then please just click others. And I would show you the results. So almost 60%, 57 come from the area of sustainability. So it's still very much in that area. But then we also see 17% being around procurement, supply chain, sustainable procurement. So the procurement teams are picking up in making it their own challenge. And then there are 7% specifically leading Scope 3 actions, which is amazing. And then 20% others. And now to give you a second question, you might have to click away the other question actually on your screen. Hope I opened the right one. Has your company actually already set Scope 3 climate targets? So that's a topic we're gonna go into today. So yes, you have those Scope 3 targets and even aligned with SBTi. So then maybe the whole discussion this year was very sensitive for you. Or yes, but not yet aligned to science-based targets. So you might want to understand what the requirements are in Scope 3 for science-based targets, or not yet, but in progress, or no, but planned at the and not planned at the moment. So everyone has maybe a little bit different view to the topic today. And that's what we love to try and find out. And there's a lot of movement, so still people choosing where they stand right now. And gonna show you a quick result. So 73% have already science-based targets. So you are definitely also the expert. So please always in the whole webinar, post your questions and comments into the chat so we can integrate them later in Q&A. And then 30% are not yet, but in progress, 15% not yet planned, and 19% yes, but not yet aligned with science-based targets. So you might again have to close the question on your screen. And from that, I hope it was a good introduction for you, Susanne, to find out who's here today. Has it been?
Yes, thank you. I'm just preparing my screen to be shared. And I think you can see it, right?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Perfect. Like Josefa already said in her introduction that we have quite a lot of ground to cover. So I will jump right into the topic. We will start with a general topic of what is SBTi. Then we'll look more specifically at the corporate carbon footprint or GHG inventory for SBTi, developing science-based targets, including some examples of targets, and how to start then reducing your emissions, how to start reaching these targets. Why is it important to stay well below 2 degrees, or better yet, below 1.5 degrees? The higher the temperatures, the worse the impacts of the climate crisis will be. So it is worth fighting for each degree, each 0.xx degree. And it is, I think, different to some of the different topics. If I don't take actions and you don't take action, it's worse. If you don't take action, it's better for me still to take action, because on the whole level, it will make the impacts less severe, and also prepare your company better for what is going to happen. So what is the science-based targets? The Science-Based Targets Initiative tries to take the 1.5 degree target goal from the Paris Climate Agreement and reduce it to make it feasible for companies to set targets for 1.5 degrees. Because the Paris Climate Agreement is generally for countries and for national levels, but not so easy to translate for companies to see what they have to contribute to reach these targets. So the science-based approach defines the emissions reduction targets specifically for companies and industries. It covers all greenhouse gas scopes 1, 2, 3 of your company, and was initiated by CDP, UN National Global Compact, World Resource Institute, and the WWF. Starting in 2020, there were about 900 companies taking action. Earlier this year, this number has reached over 8,000 companies taking action, and rising still. All kinds of industries companies from industries take action, with more companies from the service sector, but also manufacturing, food and beverage is a big share of the companies taking action, and so on. It's companies from all over the world, although there is still a European-centric target setting group. By the end of 2022, the targets or companies that have set SBTs or SBT commitments represented 34% of the global economy by market capitalization. So that's like one specific measure to show how big this movement is. And even larger is the number for DAX for Germany, where 70% of the companies listed had set or committed to science-based targets. However, Asia also saw the biggest growth in numbers of science-based targets, so it is not only a European target setting scheme. You can see this in this map where Europe makes up 54% of targets set and committed. North America is the third biggest region with most targets, and then Asia, but also other areas of the world have companies that have committed to or set science-based targets. Important here is that where the company is headquartered is where it's accounted to, so that's also skewing this graph a little bit. Science-based target has 4 key elements. In order to set science-based targets, it is mandatory to set a short-term or near-term target. This is 5 to 10 years. It is possible but not mandatory to additionally set a net zero target, that is the long-term target, to by 2050 latest. Then it is also not mandatory but wished for that companies actually do this through this part beyond value chain mitigation, where companies can invest in reductions elsewhere outside of their own value chains. And then the fourth part, this green bars, is the neutralization of residual emissions. So the reduction, you don't have to reach zero in your emissions, but have to neutralize the rest. These represent removals and is one way to achieve net zero. Companies shall set targets at parent company level. This is very important. While it is possible to set it at other parts of the company, it is more difficult to argue for this, and the idea is to set these targets at parent company level. Small and medium-sized companies have a comparatively very easy process to set targets. It's simplified, it's much shorter, and has fewer requirements. The criteria are, since end of last year, they're aligned with the CSRD SME criteria, with a few tweaks to make it fit a Science-Based Targets initiative. Additionally, there are guidelines for different sectors. There is one overarching framework that is the default way to set targets. But then there's also guidances for different sectors that make it more specific, what kind of targets the company has to set, or what other options the company has to set targets. I want to highlight one sector here, that's the flag sector, so forest, land, and agriculture. If you fall under this sector, which means you operate or you buy very large shares from the sector, you have to set these targets. Please pay attention to this. This is one of the guidances that is very detailed and has more requirements. The Science-Based Targets Initiative is made up of 5 steps. The first step is to sign a commitment letter. We've seen this was an option in the questionnaire earlier, and some companies have done this, but not yet set targets. When you sign this letter, you need your C-level of the company to agree to setting science-based targets, but other than that, there is very little you have to do besides signing this letter. Then you have 2 years to develop and set these targets. The development stage is actually, at least at the beginning, very comprehensive, because you have, at the one hand, you have to have your corporate carbon footprint be in line with Science-Based Targets Initiative. A lot of companies do not have this, even if they have a corporate carbon footprint, it's usually not in line with the Science-Based Targets Initiative. So there needs to be some adjustment, and then developing the reduction targets in accordance with the SBTi guidance, and there are different options that have different consequences for your company, and you have to go through which ones fit you best. Afterwards, there is the submit part where you submit your targets, and then they go through validation process by SBTi. After this step, your company is listed as target set on the SBTi webpage. The communicate part means that you communicate the goals publicly after they are submitted, and after that you have to report annually on the achievement towards this target publicly. We're going to look at this developed step a little bit closer now, starting with the corporate carbon footprint. They have to be in line with the greenhouse gas protocol. This is the main framework SBTi is based on or links to. It's important that you have to take a look at all Scope 3 subcategories, which is something that most companies don't have done before setting science-based targets. So this includes upstream activities from buying goods and services, capital goods, transportation, business travel, employee commuting, and then the direct emissions from Scope 1 of your fuel and energy consumption or process emissions, electricity that you buy, and then also the downstream activities from selling your products, their transportation, their end of life, the use of these products, and so on. Why is it important to specifically look at Scope 3 in this context? A lot of companies in a lot of sectors have the majority of their emissions within Scope 3. You can see that in this graph where you have companies such as in sectors such as financial service where it's 100%, but also sectors such as food and beverage and tobacco, they have 87% of their emissions in Scope 3. And yeah, this is why Scope 3 plays a significant role in setting science-based targets. Also, there are increasing requirements on your GHG inventory with the still new target submission format, where you have to break down the emissions within your scopes, what kind of data you use to come to this result. Have you extrapolated data? Where is the source of your emission factors? What kind of assumptions it's based on? You can see an example here on the side. While it is detailed, it can still be superficial in some parts, but for the major parts, they want to know more details about this, your GHG inventory, in order to make sure that everything has been included. Now we come to setting science-based targets. So you have to set targets for Scope 1 and 2 and Scope 3. Usually companies set them for Scope 1 and 2, or one target for Scope 1 and 2 and maybe one for Scope 3. If you understand this graph, you can understand the main reasons, ways to set targets. So you have the near-term science-based targets and the long-term targets. When we just look at the near-term targets, it has to cover at least 95% of your emissions from the scope. It has to be 5 to 10 years until for the target date of the target. And then you have, in this case, 3 options to set targets. Absolute reduction, it's minus 42% to 2030, for example. You have sector-specific targets, then you have to look in the sector-specific guidances. Or for Scope 2, you can have a renewable electricity target. These are 3 mechanisms for Scope 1 and 2. The same is the case for Scope 3 targets, only it becomes a little bit more complicated. But you have near-term targets and long-term targets. Now, if we just look at the near-term targets, so the top part, you have to set Scope 3 targets for your near-term science-based targets if Scope 3 makes up more than 40% of total emissions. And then you have to cover, the target has to cover 67% of Scope 3. You don't have to set a near-term target that covers everything. And then again, the target here is 5 to 10 years from the date of submission. And you have, in this case, 4 options to set targets. You have the cross-sector absolute reduction target, which is, again, this is here minus 25% to 2030, but usual to be in line with 1.5 degrees, you have to set a more ambitious target. There are sector-specific targets, again, looking at specific guidances. There are supplier and customer engagement targets, where you set targets for your suppliers or customers to also set science-based targets. This is very common right now, where you have where big companies, let's say a big supermarket chain, as all the suppliers or a big share of the suppliers to also set science-based targets, so that then in the future they can get information from the supply chain more easily. And then scope 3, physical and economic intensity targets, is where you set targets on, for example, per kilogram of your product, per value added per year. So there are certain metrics that you can set there. These intensity targets allow you to account for growth of your company, but they're only feasible if your company really grows significantly. Otherwise, it's still usually better to set an absolute reduction target, which is also easier to track. Then for net zero targets, the coverage is increased to 90% of your scope 3 emissions, and you can no longer set supply and engagement, customer engagement targets, and the other ways to set reduction targets are still possible, but they're more strict, obviously, because it's the net zero target. There are some challenges, which is what Josefa also addressed in the beginning of the seminar, with these kind of targets. They will not be able to cover all kinds of circumstances of companies. And there could be some problems with, you have one metric for scope 3, or you have, you start with 67% and then neglect for your short-term target in scope 3, and you neglect something, and then the shift to 90% coverage of scope 3 makes it really difficult to reach these targets, and also challenging, like measuring your target progress can be difficult. So there are different challenges with the way SBTi is set up. Nevertheless, it is the current market standard. It just shows that it is a complex topic, and there is a discussion now ongoing with how to address this. It was in April this year, there was the strange media coverage where where the board of SBTi rushed without talking to the technical advisories and the employees of SBTi, saying something about using environmental attribute certificates, not limiting to voluntary carbon for abatement purposes. Which is a very confusing statement, because no one really knew what environmental attributed certificates means. It's not the technical term typically used, so a lot of people interpreted it to be, oh, we can use offsets in the to reduce our emissions, which is not true. First of all, no standard has been changed as of now. And what I've introduced to you before is the current status quo. There is some there are some changes on how to set targets, and there are different proposals on this topic of environmental attribute certificates, which was open to public. I think just the beginning of this month, the public consultation was closed, and there will be a technical review, and then some suggestions of what can be changed. But what is discussed are different potential market mechanisms, including insets in your value chain, the removal credits to neutralize your emissions, and certain things. What is not discussed is that the carbon credits as offsets can be used. So this is off the table, which was, I think, the main reason for the bad press in April, and also the outrage within the community. Now let's look at some examples. There are different ways to set targets, like I said before, and they can be combined in very different ways. This is an example of SIP. who've set one target for all of scope 1, 2, 3, which is possible. And for some companies, this may make sense, but for others, it's too simple and not considering different or making you commit to something that's more ambitious than you would have otherwise. Then this is one of the most common ways to set targets by Chiba, is where they set one absolute reduction target for scope 1 and 2. And they also set one absolute reduction target for scope 3. This is, I think, one of the most common ways to set targets. Then we have another example from Bayer that have set absolute scope 1 and 2 emission reduction targets. And then they've set absolute scope 3 emission reduction targets, but they haven't set it for the whole of scope 3, but on specific categories. So here it says specifically purchased goods and service, so category 3.1, capital goods 3.2, fuel and energy related activities 3.3, upstream transportation and distribution 3.4, and then business travel, which is 3.6, I believe. So they specified which areas of scope 3 they want to focus on. Another way to set targets is intensity targets. So BMW has committed to reduce scope 1 and 2 GHG emissions by 80% per vehicle produced. So this is the metric that's relevant for them and for their sector, and takes into account selling more or less vehicles. They also commit to reduce scope 3 GHG emissions from use of sold products, so that's category 3.11, per vehicle kilometer, so per kilometer driven, because for them the fossil fuel emissions of driving a car, their car, is included in their GHG inventory. And then they additionally, because set another target, I assume this is the case because this does not cover 67% of scope 3 emissions, or they want to be more ambitious. They have committed to reduce scope 3 GHG emissions from purchased goods and services, as well as upstream transportation and distribution service per vehicle sold again. But it's too specific scope 3 intensity targets. We have another example here from Aldi, who has committed to reduce absolute scope 1 and 2 emissions. They've also committed that 75% of its supplier by emissions will have science-based targets by 2024. So this is this engagement target, supplier engagement target in this case. And you can also set a supplier engagement target by supplier spend. So this is of its suppliers by emissions, and Bergfreunde has set a target of its supplier by spend, because maybe they don't have the good data yet on emissions, or it's more feasible for other reasons. And that's it with the examples. You will receive the slides afterwards with a few more examples. And there's also the link down here where you can explore the target dashboard and see all the targets of every company committed to science-based target initiative. Now, how do you start reducing your emissions? Some companies first set targets. Maybe some of your companies have done this and then figure out how to get there. Others want to know a lot better what to do in order to reach these targets first before committing. There is no wrong or right here. This totally depends on your company, what kind of decision-making processes you have, and so on. But when you start setting these targets and also measuring your corporate carbon footprint holistically as it's required by SBTi, there are different things on how you can start. Again, this depends on companies, what best works for you and where your hotspots are, how your company is structured, and so on. But one of the first steps is understanding where you're at. Where your hotspots? Where does your company have most emissions? Also, what are activities where the carbon intensity is the highest? So if you reduce a little bit, the effect will be still significant. And understanding also how these emissions come to be. You have why is it a hotspot? Is it because you have large volumes, the intensity is high? Other reasons could be how precise is the data? Do you do spend-based screening, which is allowed by science-based targets? Do you have proxy data? Do you use average? Did you start collecting your data for your supply chain as average data or group them? Is it specific supplier data and so on to get a better understanding of how these emissions come to be? Because it's also part of the journey of setting science-based targets and reducing your targets, that your emission factors, so the way the emissions are calculated, become more precise, which does not lead to actual reductions. But it's part of the journey. So it's very important to set up a monitoring system looking at specific KPIs to track your progress and adjust your baseline when necessary. Additionally, it can be a great idea to start with a stakeholder analysis. So within your company, but also within your value chain. So who is supporting your transition processes? Who wants to bring in ideas? Don't shut them out, bring them in because they have the energy and want to help. Who do you need to have on board? Who makes decisions? Who can stop a process? Who really needs to be on board? And then who is blocking transition processes? Figure out who these people are. And which not just people, but also different departments, and get them on board, or figure out how to get them on board. And then it's also important to build relationships with your suppliers. Who already has reduction targets? Who can provide you with emission data for the things they supply you with? Or how can you support them? What ideas do they have? Start talking to them. Different ways to, like, general reduction levers. This is very specific to your product, but general levers are getting renewable energy sources within your supply chain. Within the textile industry, this is one of the main levers to reduce emissions in your supply chain. Not necessarily just changing materials, but getting renewable energies in your supply chain. Figuring out more efficient processes is also a key lever. Changing materials, or even looking at new products, which could be one way to reach reduction targets. Also, when you start out with science-based targets, you may have no idea where this goes. You have a picture of the future that can somehow look like this, but trying to get more data about what could be through, for example, what happens if you change a material? What happens if your one product is step-by-step replaced by a different product that's already in your product portfolio? What happens if you change it, add a new product? And building different scenarios of the future can help you make this blurry picture a little bit more sharp, step by step, and help you make data-based decisions. So these kind of scenario analysis can help you figure out what steps to take, or what is better to take, what kind of action is better to take. Additionally, a climate risk analysis can be extremely helpful. It can help you figure out how your company is exposed to the risk, both at your own production sites, offices, but also in your supply chain. And doing this can help you identify and prioritize actions This is also something that is going to be required by the CSRD for EU-based companies or companies acting within the EU. So it's also a very good thing to do from this perspective. Another, I think this is the last step that we suggest. There are different ways, again, there are different ways to start. But looking at your company's strategies and your strategy for reducing targets for your sustainability department, they may be in conflict with other company policies. And looking at these and figuring out if they are aligned can help you really budget for implementation, reduction measures, and tracking your corporate carbon emissions. It also helps you better plan for the future. What kind of product portfolio matches both your climate targets and your other company targets? How is the market changing, and how is your policy going with the change, and what kind of impacts are there for your company and your company strategy? All right, these were some of the ways to start looking at reducing your corporate carbon footprints. We have here a list of different methodologies for science-based targets that you will receive later on that you can click on. We've added the date of these guidances, but they change regularly, so you can also go on their website or Google for them specifically to find updated versions if that happens, because maybe you look at them later in time as well. All right, well, thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you. I really love to go into all these topics. I'm a little bit the climate nerd, so I would have a lot of questions, but there are already some in the chat. And before we go into them, maybe Susanne, you need to stop sharing, then I can share exactly, because you gave me the perfect handover to share how we are also working together to support companies in getting into action. So I think Susanne said over and over again, it doesn't stop with just getting your targets set and like internally aligning around them, but then actually really the hard part comes where you have to show how you're reducing emissions. And that's where we also as a Climate Choice work together with companies in the Scope 3 Action Group, because we as a software provider helping companies to track emissions in the supply chain and engage suppliers and understanding your own climate performance and risk. We always see that data is lovely to have a data-driven decision-making process and to have the awareness and transparency to move forward from there. But moving forward brings up so many questions, and all of these questions are coming from humans, and they are repeatedly all over the same from different departments and different companies in different industries, but the questions are the same. So some of them Susanne already brought up. They're like, yeah, I need specific supplier data if I want to show reduction of my emissions. I cannot just work with average data because otherwise emissions will always stay the same. I really need to understand, are they going up and down? And are there maybe hotspots? Are there specific categories that are super important? Or are there specific suppliers that are outperforming the others and I want to work with them? And then it's not just this data management, but it's also like, how do I address my suppliers? How can I bring maybe an award system that's working? And how do I ensure that there's also development with my suppliers, that we all move towards the same targets? Do they even have targets or not? So there are tons of questions that are all like very practical, I would say, hindering people to get into action after having set science-based targets or any kind of climate targets. And that's why we have started and we are happy to do that now already starting next week in the 3rd round, and then the next group will start in March next year. It's a 3 to 4 months program where we always go through the same 3 modules and start with really what Susanne said. First, benchmarking your own climate performance, understanding which kind of actions you already take, also in scope 3, where your risks are, and then anonymously benchmarking that in the group and really learning from and with the others to see like where are like risk and gaps in your own climate management yet, and how can we improve it. And then we go into the second step and see which kind of data is already there from your supply chain. Is there already in calculation? Do you have a hotspot analysis? Do you work with spend-based data? So we really look into the different options, how to improve your data management and how to engage your suppliers, and introduce different formats of like, using AI data to screen your suppliers, or activating suppliers really through an own data-driven approach from our platform, or to just use whichever data you have already and make it part of your own strategy, because often we see it's locked in Excel files instead of like a smart system where you can really use it to improve your tracking of how you reach your targets. And then we move in the third module and integrate from whatever you have. So it's nothing where you have to do in 3 months everything that everyone else does in 5 years, but we really look into, okay, what's your specific status quo? Where are you standing? Which kind of insights you have from your supply chain? And then can you integrate it in like a 12 months roadmap where you can, again, learn from the others, what others are doing, but also from the experts we bring in to see like what makes sense in your companies to move forward. And the experts we bring in, one of them going to be also myclimate. So for each of these modules, we bring in externals as well to share like their industry knowledge from working from many different companies. We go into scope 3 accounting. So there are many different ways how to calculate scope 3 emissions, from average to specific data. We work together with V4 here. Then with myclimate, we look specifically into scope 3 targets again and how to implement them. And then we also look with RMC Group into sustainable procurement and how to use all this data, or to gather this data also in procurement systems, so you can really also use them for forward-looking strategy and not just backwards reporting. And as said, we are happy that we have done this program already now in 3 rounds and had more than 30 companies joining, and are now having an active alumni group. So there are just a few of them here on the slide. But what really brings the group together is like a strong network of practitioners. So everyone's joining is working either in procurement or sustainability, or in areas where they really have the key role to improve that area. So it's really driven by people who have the same questions and can help each other out. And then we also support with technical and expert knowledge from these master classes. And what I always like to highlight is from people already being part of the group, that they really liked the exchange with like-minded people, but then also beside networking to really go into action and get a framework from this group, because I think we all see it, especially working in climate and sustainability, there's always so much to do. So what we often got as a feedback was, that this framework of 3 to 4 months, having every 2 weeks a check-in, really helps to like get things started and have a tangible result. So if that sounds interesting to you, as said, next group gonna start in February next year. We will, or we do have now the applications open, and you can contact us if you want to be part of that group. We do run an application phase because we really handpick people who are taking part to make sure that everyone is very much driven and active in that group, as this is the main word in it. And with that, I would hand over back to Josefa to go into the questions and Q&A.
Thank you so much to the two of you, Susanne and also Lara. I think there was a lot of content already provided. So also, if you want to review the webinar, we will share afterwards the link, then also to the YouTube channel. But before we do that, as Lara was rightly saying, we would like to have a look at the questions. And they actually show very nicely, I think, Susanne, also the interest in SBTi target setting. So that is very beautiful. And two of the questions actually link back to your stepwise process that you've been showing on setting SBTi's targets. And so So I want to connect two of them that came in. Basically, they were around what happens when companies decide to change either their Scope 3 calculation methodologies, or if they wanted to change, for example, their targets. So moving, for example, from an absolute to intensity-based targets. What is the process like with SBTi? When and how should companies also report these changes? Or is it enough if they just do it for them in their annual sustainability reports?
Yes, thank you for this question. I will share another slide that we didn't have time to look at. And I think you can see it, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So there is a mandatory target review every 5 years. So it doesn't matter if your target is 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, every 5 years, there is a mandatory review where they will look at your targets. However, there are also mandatory target recalculation triggers. So if certain things changes, you have to do this earlier than every 5 years. And this is that you have any change that's larger than 5% in your organization's total base year emissions. This could be that you change your calculation methods and you have different results, that you have supplier-specific emission factors for your the main good that you buy, and this changes your total emissions by more than 5%. This is something that triggers a recalculation. Same as if your Scope 3 emissions become suddenly more than 40%. If you have, there is a small part where you can exclude emissions from targets, and this changes significantly. So in general, any kind of significant changes, you trigger target recalculations. Also, I think one of the common ones is acquisitions will trigger recalculations. Exactly. So what then has to happen is that you have to report this to the Science Based Target Initiative. They have, like when you fill out the forms for setting your targets and committing to science-based targets, there is one form that says recalculation, and you have to start the process at the same point where you also started the whole target setting process.
All right, thank you so much. And then I think, there is these like changes to the baseline, but then what happens also was one question in the chat, if you actually don't meet your targets?
Yeah, there's another slide I can show is, I think there are different things where you don't meet your target. There's also the possibility that you commit to your targets, and you have 2 years time to submit your targets, and if you don't do this, you will be listed on their homepage, on the SBTi's homepage, as commitment removed. If you don't meet the actual targets, I'm not sure if this has actually happened yet and is on their homepage, because you have this, you usually set your target not to next year, but to 5 years to 10 years. And it's not that even though you have to report on your target every year, you don't have to have a linear reduction from your baseline to your target year. It could be that you have to invest in something, in new machinery or whatever, and it takes time for this effect to show, where it's not linear, but it goes like this, and then suddenly you have a drop of emissions, and then maybe it's a slower process again. But then you will also be shown on their homepage as targets not met. And again, minimum every 5 years, they will review your targets, and this is when they will notice if you do not tell them. If you want to tell them, I think you have to approach them, progressively and have to do this, start this conversation, because they will bother you every 5 years, but not earlier.
All right, thank you so much. So with that, we have actually answered the questions, at least that we had in the chat. I think also your presentation was very comprehensive. So we've been going, I think, from what it is, why it is important, to how do we tackle it. Yeah, so everything in just 30 minutes. And I want to, tell you a big thank you then also from our side. So it was really cool to have you, Susanne. And I hope it's not the last time also in our webinar series that we can welcome you. So for sure, also for the next Scope 3 Action Group, we will see you again. There was also a question in the chat on the link for more information on the Scope 3 Action Group. We've already been sharing it. So please have a look there always. Then also feel free to contact Lara or myself after the event if you are interested. And with that, Lara, can I just ask you to show the last slides that we have for you today? Because if you look at, also the topics that we want to review within our webinar, they're not coming out of like thin air, us thinking, what kind of topics do we want to present to you guys? But we, of course, also listen to the climate community. So we had, for example, our last Climate Transformation Summit in September. And there we've been talking about, 5, so to say, key challenges also in the industry. And if you wanted to know more what kind of key challenges these are, if we move to the next slide, and what kind of best practices are then also coming out of it, we are very much inviting you to download our best practice guide. So in the aftermath of this event today, you will be receiving a follow-up email, again, with a little bit of a summary of today's session with Susanne on SBTi target setting, but then also with the link to download this best practice guide. So there's quite some informative information in there, gathered all at the last Climate Transformation Summit that we've been holding. And if you're interested to then also stay up to date with our webinars, there's always the possibility to sign up to our newsletter, or other than that also keep posted on LinkedIn. So we would really love to stay in touch and then also go on that climate transformation journey together with you. And with that, thank you again so much, Susanne. Thank you, Lara. Lara, I'm not sure if you want to say some last important words here.
Thanks a lot for the moderation, Josefa, for hosting. And I love we are perfectly in time. I'm half Swiss, so that makes me extremely happy. And thanks a lot, Susanne, for taking your lunch break to enlighten us all a little bit. And thanks everyone for joining in. I'm always so impressed by seeing most people staying the full hour and getting it all in. But we get you now 2 more minutes to get to your next online call. So have a wonderful afternoon and a good start into the into the new season, so to say, end of the year countdown. So see you all around.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Susanne.
Thank you,
Thanks for
Susanne.
having me.
Bye.
Bye-bye.